Hey everybody, Dustin DePirac here, columnist Jeremy Price. Haven't done a preview scoop talk in a while, mostly because they played Penn State and Northwestern, and I don't know how much predicting and analysis we really had to do for those ones beforehand, but this one's really, really big. Indiana gets Michigan State tomorrow at 1 o'clock. And as far as I'm concerned, I think this game really is going to tell you what echelon Indiana's really in terms of the Big Ten, in terms of nationally. Obviously they've had a few tests so far, but I think to me this is really the game that says this is or is not an elite basketball team. This is or is not a team that belongs with Michigan, kind of the top two in the Big Ten, and belongs, in that top 10, top 8, top 5 range in that nationally. I guess how big do you think this one is, Jeremy?
No, I think it's big, and partly, obviously for this season it's big, but I think in the bigger picture it's also big because it kind of gives you an idea of where Indiana is relative to Michigan State, which has kind of been the team to beat over the last decade in the Big Ten.
Maybe 10 to 15 years Michigan State, by a little bit over Ohio State, I would say, is probably your preeminent Big Ten program.
And obviously Indiana's closed that gap pretty quickly through last year and into this year, but this is a chance to kind of prove a little bit of that staying power. Obviously, the two teams split the two games last year,
right?
Each team winning at home. And over the course of the next week and a half, obviously, we'll get a lot better idea where Indiana stands with Michigan State tomorrow, Michigan next Saturday.
Ohio State after that, the following week, Illinois and Purdue in between those as well. Yeah, the weekend games are really, really big. Obviously, this schedule has been very backloaded in terms of the Big Ten. It's been strange, both because obviously the non-conference schedule was not spectacular, and probably, ordinarily would have been better. I mean, there was the possibility for UCLA, Georgetown, and North Carolina on that. Obviously, the Legends Classic didn't get seeded that way, or didn't get drawn that way necessarily, and North Carolina is not the same, is, a decent but not national championship level North Carolina team. And then the Big Ten schedule really got backloaded. They haven't played Michigan or Michigan State or Ohio State yet after, 5 or 6 games into it. So this is kind of where this stretch right now is where you kind of find out where this team lands. I talked to Tom Crean today. I thought he had a lot of interesting things to say, and he was very honest about how he sort of views this game, and especially in the way that it's the matchups of this. I mean, he said a few times, I don't think this is a conventional matchup game for us, which seemed to me to be obviously true. I was a little bit surprised that he was so quick to admit it, I guess. But I think it is. In a lot of ways, it's a tough backcourt matchup for them. It's a tough frontcourt matchup for them. Indiana might have more firepower overall, but position by position, this is a tough one for them, almost at every spot. Michigan State's got some talent, and they've got some guys that are tough for Indiana to deal with specifically, I think.
Yeah, and I think the interesting thing about this is you could say the converse was true for Michigan State, that Indiana has some tough matchups for them. And I think that's really where this comes down to, is which team can take advantage and gain an upper hand in those matchups. Is Michigan State going to be able to use that front line size and height and weight to its advantage, or is Indiana going to be able to take advantage with
movement,
quickness,
and be able
speed,
to
range? All those factors.
Exactly. I guess we'll kind of talk about specifically what we mean. Start with kind of backcourt first. Yogi Ferrell and Keith Appling. Obviously, you've got the same sort of type of player generally. I think I think Yogi Ferrell probably has a higher ceiling just because he's got. I think he's a little bit faster. Is that accurate, you think?
I think so.
But Appling obviously is the veteran. I mean, he's got the same type of skills. He's very, very fast in transition. I think Tom Crean used the word nightmare in transition, I believe, today. Obviously, he's a tough guy in terms of getting the hole. He's a lot better shooter than he used to be. Still not a great one. He's shooting about 31% from 3, but can beat you. Has 23s. It's not something that you can, not somebody you can, leave open. Obviously, Yogi Ferrell is becoming a very similar type of player. That's maybe the more even matchup out of the group, but with Michigan State having the more experienced guy that's been through it a little bit. The shooting guard matchup I think is obviously very interesting because you got Jordy Hall as the shooter, and then you've got Gary Harris, who is really a heck of a player, really good athlete, freshman obviously, but Mr. Basketball last year in Indiana. That's going to be, I think, a tough guy for them to deal with one way or the other.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about Harris is, I mean, Tom Izzo's said this several times this year, that he's one of his best, if not his best defender, actually.
Oh, yeah, well, I'm not surprised about that.
So it'll be kind of interesting to see what they do with Harris in that role. Do they want him to stick on hulls and keep him from getting off, or do they want to...
And just jam him as some teams have done.
or do they want to maybe switch him over to Farrell and try and eliminate some of that dribble penetration?
Although Appling is an awesome on-ball defender too. Really, all three of their backcourt guys. I mean, Brandon Dawson leads the team in steals. I mean, he's a heck of an athlete, heck of a player too. So I mean, they could go conventional straight up and feel pretty good about that. I think. I mean, Appling can definitely handle Farrell without question because he's excellent at stopping dribble drive stuff like that. He's great on point guards. Harris can kind of can try to sort of swallow holes up whole, and Dawson and Oladipo is one of those sort of heavyweight looking matchups where you've just got two freak athletes.
Yeah, Dawson and Oladipo's probably circle that one as the matchup du jour for my money in this one. And it's interesting because both of them do affect the game different ways. But I think
Dawson's a little bit more post oriented. Oladipo's a little bit more perimeter oriented. But
I think their abilities are such that both are versatile enough that they could actually very easily cancel each other out.
Right. Yeah, no, exactly. In exactly that way. I mean, Dawson's a better rebounder. Again, he's a little bit more post-oriented. I think he's only taken like 3 3-pointers or something like that. That's not his game. Whereas Vic doesn't take a lot of them, but lately he's making everyone he takes, which is, I mean, he's crazy. He's 12 for his last 14, I think, since December 15th. Doesn't take it if he's not wide open, but hitting him at a crazy level. But yeah, both of those guys. I mean, Oladipo is the guy that takes the ball, top of the key, comes off ball screens and stuff like that. Dawson's a little bit more post-oriented, and they both defend really well. Although Dawson's a little bit more post-oriented that way, but both of them, can defend in the post, on the perimeter, and just get after you. I think you're exactly right. They bring so much to the game on both sides that they can cancel each other out just because, I mean, they're both going to contribute a lot, but it might even out at the end. The ones that are interesting, I think, in terms of, even more so in terms of contrast, I think, like you said, the front court matchups, Michigan State goes humongous. Michigan State goes bigger than anybody. Adrian Payne is 6'10", 240. Derek Nix 6'9", 270. That's what they're listed at. Who knows what Derek Nix actually is today? But those are big dudes. Those are very, very large human beings. So with Indiana, obviously they're a little bit smaller, but a little bit quicker. Christian Watford, you got a guy who I think in his heart is a 3. But with this team especially is a step out for it. He's rebounding better than he ever has, but it's the question. Okay, you're dealing with guys who like to block shots, who like to play in the lane a lot. What happens when you try to take them out? I mean, obviously Watford's goal is going to be used, to use his advantages there. He's, I think, 3rd in the league in 3-point field goal percentage. Obviously, he's going to want to do that and try to drag at least one of those guys out on the perimeter with him and see what he can take advantage of there. And that's going to be interesting to see how that goes down. Obviously, whether it's Payne or Nix, whoever gets who, when they're in man-to-man, that's going to be a very interesting matchup. Can Watford keep those guys out of the lane, keep them from just dominating down low?
Yeah, and if Payne is defending on Watford, I think it's obviously critical that Watford be able to pull him away from the basket,
right,
kind of eliminate
Payne
that
blocks
shot blocking,
a lot of shots.
Eliminate that help, and if they can get Zeller isolated on Nix, then I think that's advantage to Cody Zeller.
Right, exactly. That's the one you're hoping. I would say. I mean, maybe you're even. I don't know that you would put Nix on Watford. I don't know that that's a move that you would make, but I do think straight up, I think Zeller is in a better situation there. Obviously, and Tom Crean pointed this out again, last year's game with Michigan State for Cody Zeller, Tom Crean used, I think, the perfect word for it. Indoctrination was what it was like, as he found out, basically, this is what the Big Ten's going to be like. He had 4 points in that game in East Lansing, and he really got beat up. I mean, had never seen anything like that. Payne and Nix were both hitting on him really, really hard, and he got beat up. Frankly, just got worked. But as Tom also pointed out, the very next game he gets Jared Sullinger, wins that matchup. It helped that Sullinger was in foul trouble that day for most of it, and some other guys were as well. But Indiana wins that game in large part because obviously Zeller put them in those positions and played just a lot tougher, and seemed like that game woke him up a lot. It'll be interesting to see the progress in the course of a year. Obviously, he did a lot better against Michigan State the second time around, had 18 points in that game last year. And it's going to be interesting to see how this works. I mean, Tom Crean made the point, it's about movement for him, basically. He does have to realize that he's going to be faster, going to be quicker, going to be more athletic, agile, everything than either one of those guys. I think he's still got the edge on Payne there, and obviously certainly has the edge on Nix.
Well, I think one of the things that Cody Zeller is really good at is getting the opponent in foul trouble. You saw it, you mentioned the Sullinger game last year, the regular season game against Kentucky, Anthony Davis. One of the few games he was in foul trouble all year.
Right.
I think that's something that he did it earlier this year against Bergeron, Wisconsin, got him in foul trouble. So I think that's an area that Indiana hopes that maybe that trend continues, that Zeller can get one or both of those frontline guys in foul trouble, and then that kind of levels the playing field a little bit on that front.
Right, absolutely. That makes it a much more even game, especially if they have to go deeper into that. If they have to go get Alex Garn off the bench or somebody like that, when they have to drag those guys in there, it obviously changes the game a little bit. I think, obviously, talking about all this, and we've talked about conventional and unconventional matchups. I mean, first off, I think you're going to see a lot of zone, but also I think you're going to see a lot of Will Sheehy. This is going to be a really big Will Sheehy game for sure. I mean, I think, you never want to leave Jordan Hulse at the bench. He on the bench for too long. Obviously, he does too much. He can handle. Obviously, he can shoot as well as anybody in the Big Ten and in the country. But the one way you make this an even matchup straight up is if you move Sheehy into that lineup. I don't think he starts because I think Crean goes with what he's been doing. But I think you'll see a lot of situations where you'll see Vic, Will, and Yogi Ferrell as your backcourt. I think Sheehy can take on a Brandon Dawson. That's a really interesting matchup too. I mean, Oladipo Dawson's really good, but Sheehy Dawson's just as good. I think, and maybe put Oladipo on Dawson or something like that. You'll see Oladipo on Harris. I'm sorry. So I think you'll see a lot of Will, but I think you'll see a lot of zone. I mean, I think you'll see a lot of different matchups. And just Tom Crean just trying to do anything just to mix it up that way, and just not allow those guys to take advantage of certain matchups.
Yeah, and Crean talked about that today, was just kind of mixing up the defenses, giving some different looks, and I think that you're going to see the same hold for Tom Izzo, who likes his man-to-man as well as the next guy, but I think anybody that's played or seen Indiana play this year knows that throwing a little zone is probably not a bad idea.
Not a bad idea. Now, Penn State tried it. And Yogi Ferrell hit 3 threes, Will Sheehy hit 3 threes, and Vic Oladipo hit 2 threes. And the guys that weren't supposed to beat you did. So there's always that element to it, and they all know that. But it's going to be an interesting one. I think you'll find out a lot about Indiana tomorrow. Thanks a lot, guys.